Everybody claims they paint Grimdark these days, but only a few truly commit to making it look the way it should. Want to paint your miniatures Grimdark? Then you have to practice making them look and feel Grimdark. And I mean that in the most literal way possible. So for today's video, I wanted to make something from scratch. Something small, basically a practice blank. Before we even consider painting techniques, color palettes, or weathering, Grimdark already begins much earlier in the process. It starts with shapes. I'm talking about spikes, barbed wire, skulls, vertical and gothic silhouettes, labyrinths of chains, pipes and wires and dripping candle wax. Let's call them the Grimdark tropes. These elements truly contribute to shaping the aesthetic of Grimdark, the look of our characters, the context surrounding them, and how the environment influences their psyche and physical appearance. I want today's model to incorporate a good number of these. My original idea for this was some kind of Servitor, but as I kept working on this, adding more context and more of these Grimdark tropes, the story started to change. It felt like a defeated warlord, captured, mutilated, and helpless, constantly injected with stimulants so that he cannot escape the suffering. Well, to lean into the gothic, the dystopian, and the macabre, I've decided to use mundane items for their very striking impact and unique shapes. This is how I add Grimdark tropes. So I've made the cross from scratch with balsa wood, then intertwined real cables with copper wiring. Adding clock gears, jewelry bits, and even pieces of cloth. With this build, I also want to push the feeling of this world towards the weird and uncanny, exaggerating some features to create an uncomfortable sensation. One slightly larger eyeball, distorted anatomy, wires and gears connecting vital organs to impossible machinery. Now, placing these materials sounds and looks easy, but you've got to build a sort of muscle memory for it over time. This is why I say take my advice and start with something small. The more you practice this, the more confident you will feel when you tackle on bigger projects. Learn how to layer them, how to physically place them. Visualize the world you're creating and work within that atmosphere. Help yourself using Grimdark tropes. Not only does it look cool, but it makes for far more interesting miniatures and painting opportunities. All of these aspects are covered in depth in our courses, so if you want deeper breakdowns and more structured lessons on these tropes and techniques, the grimdarkcompendium.com is the best place to start, but more on that later. So now that we have seen what helps the Grimdark aesthetic in the forms, let's practice how to reflect it into the painting. I want the flesh to feel uncomfortable to look at. To get this effect, we cannot simply slap on one solid color or one solid finish. We have to rely on variation. Mottling, discolorations, uneven tones. All these imperfections make the skin feel stressed and affected by the story and its environments. So I'll quickly go over the priming stage. I often like to introduce a temperature filter in between my passes. So after my first coat of black and a highlight with a zenithal white, I come with a red-brown sprayed from below, catching all these shadows here, especially on the flesh of our tormented soul. I just get the color here, letting some areas stay very dark from the black primer, and readjusting the highlights with some pure white, concentrated on the highest details. Now, I personally tend to correct the highlights a bit too much in the pursuit of a subtle, realistic feel, but that's a matter of personal choice. This temperature here is just a visual guide for me and will show through later on in the paint job. If you like your miniatures a bit more stylized, leave that red-brown more visible. The next stage is layering enamels and oils. We just have to keep in mind that everything from now on will start mixing. This will determine what the real final base color will look like. So to start off, I lay down a foundation using Villainy Ink Caput Mortuum. It ties in with the temperature filter and it gives the oils a smoother surface to work on. So I use it neat and straight from the pot, no mineral spirits, and I want a complete coverage of all the flesh. However, I'm going to clean this up using the reductive technique, so I come with a Q-tip and mineral spirits, followed up by a clean brush. This removes the excess caput mortuum, leaving the leftover just in the recesses, and that gives us a natural shading right away. So next up, I can start blending in some oil. And for now I've picked a color close to the original base tone, so I went with a mix of Absalom 502 light flesh tone and dead flesh. And with all the subsequent passes later, I will add more light flesh tone to the mix to start highlighting. But the color choice here doesn't really matter. What matters is mastering the right quantity of pigment on your brush. I load my brush into the oil and then unload about 99% of the pigments off the bristles. We use small quantities, working slowly and thin, and let it mix with that residue of caput mortuum where present. Now I start to introduce a hue on the cold side, so I choose Villainy Ink Umbral Nightshade, and notice how little I load on my brush. This time the application will be selectively placed, just where I want those cold accents, so near the jawline, areas that I want in contrast with the red-brown tones. It doesn't need to be perfect right away, it's just a matter of placing this slowly and carefully. We want some of our paints to mix, but we don't want everything to collapse into one solid color, so be careful controlling the application. And after a quick pass of a blow dryer, I can finally come with a small brush, only damp with mineral spirits, and start controlling the Umbral Nightshade with the reductive technique. Mind that this will inevitably reactivate the Umbral Nightshade, the dead flesh, and the caput mortuum, so we can just start blasting this with mineral spirits and hope for the best. But instead we pass with gentle dabs, working small and with tiny amounts of mineral spirits. And if we end up lifting too much paint with the mineral spirits, that's not an issue at all. We still have a bit of that acrylic temperature filter showing through. The beauty of using oils and enamels is that painting like this creates very cool looking patterns, and everyone can do this. The only requirement really is correct handling of quantities and a bit of brush control. But this is such an easy and cool way to add color variation and temperature shifts. At the same time, what we're doing here is that we're also building up modeling, texture, and surface variation, which with oils naturally happens as we paint. Here I'm going to be repeating these last couple of steps to introduce one more color and then one final highlight. So first I apply another pass of oil. Again, we want to work this very thin so we don't overpower what was done previously. And then I will do the same using Villainy Ink Colia Green. The quantity on my brush is minimal, especially with this paint. A small quantity goes a long way. Selectively placed only in a few areas, and controlled with a slightly damp brush. Now this is what I consider to be my base color. It's already shaded, it contains mottling, and has tons of subtle variations of temperature, and everything is blended. Imagine that this is the flesh of our subject in a neutral state. So this will be the moment to come with all the additional effects, those that come from the environment, the narrative elements, the decay, the weathering, and much more. And it may be surprising to you, but I'm gonna do my first pass of these using acrylic washes. And yes, it is safe to paint on top of oils, provided that the application was completely smooth. Just because we have enamel washes doesn't mean that we have to disregard acrylic washes. Let's not forget to use all the tools and techniques at our disposal, depending on the situation and for the appropriate result. In this instance, there's something happening here, and you might be wondering how these lines and veins are looking so thin. Well, the answer is that since we have worked with oil until now, we have a patina of oil molecules sitting there right on the skin. And the water-based paints are being repelled by the oil, so this lets me slide across the surfaces with my brush and create very fine streaks that look in scale with the miniature. So Citadel shades or contrast paints can become extremely effective at this point to create veins and capillaries, or even bring more color variations. For example, cardboard crimson or flesh terrace red, used for gruesome details and bloody streaks. Athonian camo shade, Agaros dunes, or a sepia ink can instead be selectively placed near the mouth or belly to showcase signs of organ failure, decomposition, bodily humors, what have you, really. And lastly, I can bring this closer to completion, not finished, but at least closer, with one final pass of Villain Ink Goon's Grime. Not as a unifying wash, as you often see, but this time selectively placed in streaking motions or at the lowest details of the miniature. At the same time adding texture and tying the decaying effect together with the rest of the hues and the pallid skin tone. Alright, so flesh is looking decent. Let's proceed very quickly to other things I want to show you today, a bit more tabletop standard level. Pipes, cables, and tubes. How can we make pipes look grimdark? The answer is at the core of the whole style. We try our best to make these surfaces reflect the environments, the atmosphere and conditions of a dark and oppressive universe. We take all the opportunities to make even the most mundane detail look visceral or convey discomfort. One way to do it is to try balancing style with uncomfortable realism. Let's do this tabletop standard, but paying attention to the variation. So for this cable, I wet blend a couple of acrylics, AK Sahara yellow and red brown, and finish off with a highly diluted pass of that same yellow just to unify the look. And then a simple pass of decrepit filth, blow dried immediately, and just barely removed in some spots. This is the simplest form of that variation we're looking for. Where the enamel stays, the surface finish is matte to chalky. Where we remove it, depending on how we remove it, we either reveal the previous surface finish or create completely new transitions, depending on whether we use mineral spirits or if we remove it dry, which we'll see shortly. That's how we create variations, and enamels and pigments are our best allies for this. Some more dirty, some more reflective, some a bit more striking, like this one. Maybe we paint a hazard stripe pattern or something like that. I paint this with Everland Sunset and Acid Yellow, simply wet blending the two colors until it looks kinda interesting. And then just to push a bit more color variation in the shadows, I introduce Citadel Fugan Orange. This time, after decrepit filth, I will perform a dry removal, meaning using a Q-tip with no mineral spirits. You see that the grime and dirt only remain in the shadowed areas, and the rest was sort of filtered. So, this is what I meant. These two cables were done using basically the same colors, but controlling variations differently. Just different types of application and removal. Now let's do another. I want this thick one on the side to read as a rubber hose. So I will try to make this look as realistic as possible, and again, I aim to make this look uncomfortable. So for the base color, I mix an AK rubber black with one brushful Vallejo blue ink. It's a good idea sometimes to add some color in the dark values and make things a bit more interesting. Now I'm going to completely alter the surface finish with a coat of high quality gloss varnish. You can see that for now it's pretty basic, so one solid color and one solid finish. We said we want things with lots of variations, so the next couple of steps are going to change everything. After letting the varnish dry, I come with the villainy ink Decrepit Filth, and I mix with it a small amount of pigment powder, like AK Interactive Industrial Dirt or something like that. With one hand I apply the mix, and with the other I have my hairdryer directly pointed at the paint. So you see it starts drying extremely matte and almost chalky looking. Now this is one of those moments where I wish I could cut my hands off, as here I've completely overdone the removal pass. I created the extreme chalky powdery finish, and then I proceeded to just delete that for no reason, because I went into autopilot mode. You know, apply enamel, remove enamel. It's a pretty common mistake in general. That's why it's so important to practice doing these things. Control application and removal, and planning accordingly. We should have spots where it's extremely filthy and chalky, others where it's super clean, maybe coming with more gloss varnish on top, just very lightly stippled in a few selected spots, and then leaving all the variations in between. We create the two extremes and make sure there are transitional states between the grime and the gloss. Now, I still think this came out pretty cool and varied, but this would have looked way better if it had retained more of that extreme powdery effect, just in a couple of spots. As for the others, really, they are all just slight variants, using similar colors with different finishes. The only exception being this hose right here that I wanted to feel more like medical equipment instead of industrial grade. So I did one simple coat of Tamiya Clear Red. Nothing special. We could work even more on these and be a bit more precise, but I think this, for being a practice blank, is sufficient for now. And we can apply the very same principles to probably the single most prevalent Grimdark trope ever: skulls. So hopefully you'll find this very useful and you'll use this plenty of times. The following recipe is very similar to what we have on the website in the Flesh and Bone series, with my personal spin on this. So start with the skulls all looking white, but with one or two of a different base color, let's say a bone white by Vallejo. And after that, we start introducing some temperature filtering and color variation using Citadel shades. I want every skull to look slightly different, and this means that I will use just different combinations of these washes. So I take Colia green shade, Athonian camel shade, and Seraphim sepia, and start tinting the bone. I come with 1 part wash and about 2 or 3 parts water, and multiple passes with gradual amounts of tinting. And this is what I like to do, so whenever a wash looks like it's about to dry, I come with a brush damp with water and stop the color from drying. Doing this enough times will leave the bone looking a bit like this, with all these cool discolorations and lots of interesting mottling. So you see, we have lots of variety here, but also lots of color. Some have more of this cold blue tint, others lean into a sickly yellow. It depends on your choice of shades. If you apply only one or you stack them on together, it's your choice. I let this dry for a while and then come with a solid coat of Villain Ink Goose Grime. Neat, no thinning, nothing. And here hopefully you can see the reason why we use this paint all the time, as it's one of the most versatile. You can and should use it for weathering, but it can also be used to shade, create texture, alter the surface finish, and stain the surfaces. All of these aspects can be manipulated to create further variation, based on the way you remove this. So if we polish Goose Grime with a dry Q-tip, you can immediately see how it completely changed the looks of this. The yellowish brown tinge and the slight texture contributes to the aesthetic in multiple ways. We can polish the skulls using fingers or dry brushes, just on the foreheads to reveal more highlights. And each skull ends up looking slightly different, with all sorts of interesting discolorations and character. To add one final note, I think it's a good idea to age this bone, make it look even more ancient. And typically how we can control this is by introducing some ochre or yellow. With the passing of time, all the fats and oils contained inside the bone can start to oxidize, and this normally leads to a yellowing process, but it can also become brown to even black. Every skull here is different, going from the sickly blue to yellow and olive green to dark brown. Each has its own little story here that we could enrich even further with more surface variation, making them look dusty or highly polished or everything in between, exactly like with our pipes. But after a couple more touch-ups, absolutely tabletop standard application here on the iron and rotted wood, we have something that looks pretty decent so far. So if we wanted to add more pronounced weathering effects, flesh effects, gore, stuff like that, now is the time. After everything is all rendered accordingly, only at the end we may come with maybe some additional grime or decay effect, or maybe some blood effect here between the torso and the pipes, just to increase the sensation of unease and make everything read just a bit more visceral. But really, I hope that I could at least partially get my point across with this. Unless adding all this dirt and gore effects is the main focus of our paint job, that's not what really defines Grimdark. Are you portraying the dystopian grimdarkness of the far future? Then do exactly that. Work on envisioning the aesthetic. Make your miniatures look and feel like they truly belong in the Grimdark universe. Let the process itself reflect that intention. Master the use of all tools and paints at your disposal. Understand their properties inside out and be creative with them. We hope you enjoyed this video, find it interesting and informative. Remember to check out the grimdarkcompanion.com for in-depth guides on the Grimdark style, as well as courses and lessons on techniques like soft pressing, hair application, fur application, glue technique, conversion, tons of painting guides, and much more. We are running the winter sale right now with some of the best offers we've ever put together with massive amounts of value. The winter packs are perfect for the holidays. The lifetime membership is at the lowest it's ever been, so if you want permanent access to all Grimdark Companion tutorials, past, present, and everything we release in the future, this is the best time to grab it. So stop by, grab some Villain Ink. That is the best way to support what we do. This is all for today. Thank you for your time, and I will see you in the next video.